Hey everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I want to show y'all how I made this necklace. So let's get started. I began using pre-made Celtic necklaces from online. All the tools and materials will be listed down in the video description below. I had removed the chain and all of the jump rings off of them. Now I'm going through with a 12 gauge dead soft aluminum. Again, links down below. And I'm just using my fingers and pliers to shape it around the center stone, which is actually what's it called? Stained glass, like beveled component, like a little beveled diamond. But you could do this using whatever kinds of different shaped and sized stones that you have. Now, I had started shaping around one of the side corners, I guess, if that makes sense, and I decided it actually works out a lot better if I shape from one far tip. So I just came through, again, this wire is very forgiving, straightened it back out with my pliers, and then smooshed it down properly to where I decided that I wanted to have it. Now, I'm just using the 12 gauge aluminum because that's what I had on hand. You could bypass a lot of the steps that I'll be doing by just using a 12 gauge copper. Now I'm coming through with my flush cutters, with the flat side of my flush cutters, and trimming the ends down. And now using a steel block set in a little rubber, like kind of buffer, I'm using the brass side of my jeweler's hammer to hammer this out a little flatter, but mostly I'm doing this for work hardening it. I want this piece to hold its shape without having to worry at all about it bending or anything. So I just hammer it out until it frames exactly how I want it to. It measure lots, cut lots. And now I'm over at my metal bench, and just using a file, I'm shaping the far point down into a little bit more, like whenever I do an acute angle bend in the wire, it's not as sharp as I want it to be, like the wire isn't. So by removing a little bit of material, it helps to make it look just a little pointier. Like I don't want it to be weapon grade jewelry, but I do want a little bit more sharpness there. So just using different sizes and shapes of files to get the effect that I'm going for. Again, testing out the measuring. And now back over at my jewelry desk, I'm lining the two ends up and just using a copper foil to kind of shape around this. Part of why I used aluminum on this project is I didn't want to do any hard soldering with like a torch or anything. And so by going through with the copper tape, it's over the aluminum, it's enabling me to go over it with the soft solder like we'll be doing shortly. And now I'm just coming around measuring how much of the copper tape that I'm going to need to use. This is just one of infinite ways that you could go about wrapping this in the tape, but it worked. So sometimes in a project, that's what counts, is did it work? Yes, okay. But yeah, definitely learning as I go. This was my very first time doing anything like this, so I learned a lot. Going through now after setting a bit of the 1/2 inch copper tape around the aluminum, and now I'm just shaping it down a little bit more, wrapping quite tightly the foil onto the metal frame. Now, I think in the future, whenever I'm doing this, I will go ahead and just hard solder, the copper frame, and whenever I get to that point, I will definitely make a tutorial about it for y'all. Now I'm going through with an agate burnisher and just trying to smooth down as many of the lines and creases, there in the copper tape as I can, because that'll give us the smoother a surface we have to put our soft solder down on, the better, I think. So now I'm going through with a 1/4 inch copper tape. Now this is, you want to make sure that it's like I don't know, that I guess it would be like conductive, maybe. At least whenever I'm shopping for this stuff for electroforming, I keep an eye out for it being conductive. But I guess what I'm getting at is I want to make sure that it's not just copper colored, it's actual copper, and that way the solder will actually stick to it. So just be a little mindful whenever you're shopping around. But again, you can always check out the links down below. And now I'm coming through and just being very careful to place the tape where there's maybe 1.5 millimeters of material creeping around to the front on each side of our beveled stone, or bezeled stone, I guess. And then it helped a lot to leave the tape on the strip instead of just pulling it all off at once. Then folding over the end and bringing that around. And the more you do this, the more experienced you'll get and the more naturally it'll come. And now we're just smooshing down the back. I definitely have more material holding around on the back side than I do on the front, but that's more personal taste. But you do want a little bit holding on to the front, just enough that it cups around and actually will properly bezel the stone. Now, I would not recommend doing this with a polymer clay or resin piece. I was pushing it by using glass that's been enameled with nail polish on the back. Went through, used the burnisher, and now I'm using, it's called a quad hands. It's like a helping hands, but they attach with magnets, and so you can adjust them all different which ways. It's got short and long. I didn't use any flux here. I'm using a rosin core solder from like the electrical section at the hardware store. It's what I have on hand, but I recommend the silvered solder that the link down below is too. But I just wanted to experiment and make sure, since this was for my own personal wear, to see what I could get away with, how this stuff will hold up over time. That way, if I don't have to pay for the extra, I mean, it costs quite a bit more for the silvered stuff, but if it holds up okay, then, why not? You can actually see just kind of brushing the, this is a walnut hollow wood burning tool with a solder tip, but you can see just lightly going over the surface really just drags that solder around. And so you can go over and over it. I did not find a point where it was no longer workable, and just smooth it out as much as you can. You can see, just touch into the tip, picking up a bit of that solder. Now, I am definitely up for some tips and tricks on soldering because I'm very, very new to this. And while I've done a little bit of electrical soldering for like LEDs and stuff, I'd like to learn more. Like, touching the tip of the iceberg on this one has only shown me how much more there will be for me to learn and develop my techniques in. So I'm really interested in what y'all have to say about that. Using a copper like Brillo pad, scrubby thing, I'm just cleaning off the rosin in the solder kind of builds up after a little bit. And so now I'm coming through and bridging the gaps between our stone and the frame. And this is where things started to get really messy for me. If I had thought to use like a little piece of metal in between the two points or something, like, I think that would have been much nicer. But again, so much that we can improve on in our next project. So now I'm coming through using a 26 gauge bare copper wire from parawire.com. I'm just doing about 4 or 5 rotations around the frame, as you can see here. Just kind of use your pliers if your fingers don't fit, but just whip stitching that through. No fancy weaving or anything yet on this one. And the idea here is I wanted to show you the thought process and the kind of how I mess up and how I recover on this one. That way you can take these techniques and apply them towards your own work. And now I'm coming through and taking the Celtic knot component that I scavenged from a necklace and just whip stitching it on. Again, about 4 or 5 rotations on the frame, then 4 or 5 rotations around both, and then 4 or 5 rotations again on the frame, just to get everything really bound together and to keep it as equal as possible. Whenever I'm trying to make something symmetrical, it's a lot easier if I pay attention to the fine details like that and try to keep things placed, try to keep the same quantity. I'm not a very tidy person when it comes to making jewelry, so there's still going to be some variation, but that's okay. And now I'm going to be doing that on the other side as well. And then I'm going to go through on the front and back and lay down some solder. I feel like some flux would have worked for this, but the flux that I had was not reacting well with this solder. I'm not sure if it was the wrong kind of flux or if it was my own inexperience, but I'm doing this dry. There is no flux and it's worked-ish. So So again, really interested in what you guys have to say about that. But the enameled zinc pewter alloy component from the necklace, the solder didn't want to stick to it. So that's why I was really glad that I had originally planned to just wire wrap it on. And it gives it a little bit of movement also. Now I'm going through with a file and just tidying up the back. I really didn't want anything to irritate on my skin. Now here you can see this is the front side of the piece, but I had the little bridged parts and the wire wrapping. Just went ahead and just laid down a whole bunch of solder all over it. It started to get a little goopy and like much, but that actually gave me an opportunity, as you can see here, to go through and file some of it down and make it a little bit smoother. I'm also using a steel bristled brush to just try to burnish it down. Maybe again, I wanted to see, how much stress can this take before the copper starts showing through, and it took a lot of stress. Like, I never had any copper end up showing through. The parts that I couldn't get to smooth down with the file and the brush, I actually just went back in with the soldering tip of the tool, and then whenever it cooled back down, filed it again. So again, note to future self and anybody who's going to try their hand at this, the cleaner you keep each step, the less cleanup work you're going to have to do, but you can fix a lot of stuff in cleanup. So going through, and for the two, these are 1-inch square beveled stones, just wrapping it in the tape same way as before, burnishing it with the agate burnisher same way as before. And I've also used like wooden dowels or anything a little bit softer than metal to burnish. Here I'm coming through with some scrap 16 gauge wire. Now this has not been enameled. Like, it's parawire, but it's bare parawire. It's not their enameled craft wire. And I'm just making a little pea-style loop at each end. Normally I make my loops like balloons, but I had something specific in mind for this. And each piece was about 2 inches, and I'm bending it just right in the middle. Actually, it was probably closer to 2.5 to accommodate room for making the loop, but you can see how it frames the edge of our little beveled piece there. And I'm just doing that to both sides, making sure things, again, are just as symmetrical as I can keep them. And now I'm coming through with some more strips of the 1/4-inch tape, 1/4-inch copper tape, and taping to the back first, and then bringing it around to the front, and just smushing and rubbing it in a bit. I didn't cram it down in there between the wire and the main piece, but I did just give it a quick sweep with my thumb. Sorry, I just bumped the microphone. I didn't know if you'll be able to hear it. And then again, coming in on the back, on the next side, just keeping that lined up and tidy, and then just wrapping around so that it holds that wire to the side. And again, this piece is a personal piece for myself, so I didn't mind trying out different things that I don't know for certain if it'll be very durable, but well, I'm the guinea pig on this one. So just going through and doing that now again to all 4 sides of, and I've done this to the other stone as well that'll be on the other side of the necklace. The reason I'm doing this piece in this style is so that it's going to be sitting over the collarbone and trapezius muscle, I think. Yeah, shoulder muscle, like not quite your neck, not quite your shoulder. And on me that's quite curvy and there's a lot of movement there, and I wanted the necklace to be able to accommodate those curves and movement. So now I'm just coming through, painting on the solder. I hope one day to have one of the soldering irons that has the temperature control built into it, but this one from, like, I think it was Michael's or something in the wood burning section seems to work just fine. And you can see even when the piece is hot, I still transfer it from one side to the other. That way I can get to different, or from one hand to the other on the quad hand. That way I can get all different sides and facets without burning my fingers. And I have these nice little knobs where you can cinch it down to keep it. I really like this style of helping hand. Now here, my iron was starting to maybe I had been using it for too long, or maybe the heater turned on and it wasn't getting as much power, the house heater, I mean. And so whenever the iron gets too cool, you'll get like these little peaks, but you just wait for it to heat back up and you smooth them down. Now I'm going through with jump rings that I made in the bronze tone from Parawire. These are 18 gauge 1/8 inch jump rings. And just joining the pieces together, and you can see how that has a nice little like swing and wiggle to it. It makes me really happy. And now I'm going through with some anodized aluminum from theringlord.com. And I just kind of scavenged like whatever rings I could find that were the right size for what I needed. Like these two here are some big solid brass rings from, gosh, like 6 years ago. I don't know. I don't throw anything away. So I was like, hey, don't I have this thing? And they worked perfect. This was not a planned part of the necklace design. Clearly, because it doesn't fit through the rings. But that's okay. This isn't what we planned, but this is what's happening. So we're going to have to figure something out for that. But just trying to get as good of a closure as I can. Again, in a perfect world, I'd go through and spot solder those just to be fancy. But just adding them, they're like a 14 gauge brass, so it's heavy enough that unless somebody starts swinging from my necklace, I don't think I'll have to worry about the budded closure coming apart. Now here I am using some enameled Parawire. This was just a scrap piece of 16 gauge that I had laying about, and it's about maybe 2.5 inches, and I've bent it in half to make a large loop. And now I'm just, you can see, splaying the two little parts out and bending them around each side of the point of the Celtic knot. Now this was very improvisational, and you'd need to adapt it to suit whatever piece that you're working with, but it was a way that I was able to relatively subtly add a flat loop like this to the component without too much effort. Again, I kind of wish I had, had these out of solid copper or something where I could solder to it, but it is what it is, and that's all right. Now also, I've gone through and painted this with a gold Lumiere paint. That was completely my own choice and option because I need this to be gold for a costume, but there's no reason at all why you couldn't just leave it the silver toned solder. And actually, you could go through with the silver toned solder and then dip the whole thing in an electroforming bath and either just plate it or build it up to a really nice, like, bumpy, cool copper. So again, tons of different options here. But if you don't like the gold, just don't paint it gold on your own project. But normally for myself, I normally would never wear this color, but I'm going to be painted purple, dressed up like a dragon while I wear this necklace. Because I'm a grown-up. Oh my ancestors would be proud. But yeah, you can see here that flat loop worked out wonderfully. I just joined it together with more of those 18 gauge 1/8 inch rings to the brass wire, and then joined it on the other side. And I'm pretty happy with that. Lots of movement, sometimes too much, but not so bad whenever it's on. And now for the back of the necklace, because I didn't want this to just sit up directly onto the nape of my neck, I'm using more of the same 12 gauge dead soft aluminum and hammer. I don't really hammer that fast, I just sped it up. Clever editing. And just work hardening it a little bit, shaping it. I've got a loop here on each end, just made with the largest part of my round nose pliers, and adding some lobster claw clasps using more of those 18 gauge 1/8 inch Parawire rings. I really love using Parawire because since it's non-reactive, I've never once have I had to worry about it turning my skin green. And now I'm adding some anodized aluminum to each end of the necklace to give the lobster claw clasps something to grab onto. And whenever I'm in costume, I'm not sure which side I'm going to be taking the necklace on and off from, and which is why I went ahead and just put a clasp on each side. And that's that. So that's how I did it. I learned a lot. And you can hear the cat scratching on her scratching post. She's done now. It's okay. I learned a lot, honestly, off of doing this piece. It was my very first soldering attempt. I know it's successful. It held together. It's not paining me to wear. It gave it a little bit more of a rustic, like antiqued relic look than the sleek, smooth, elvish craftsmanship that I was going for. But there's always room for improvement, and so I'll definitely be tackling more pieces like this in the future. But I know that the gold tone isn't everybody's cup of tea, but this is my cup of tea for this costume. So you can always do your own project in whatever color scheme that you would like. I'm also really interested in experimenting with the vintage like metal stains that they have out now. So I think that would be really cool for use on this. I'm not sure how it'll react with the silvered solder, but experimentation is the spice of life, right? Or something. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, comments, or ideas, leave them down below. I love hearing from you guys. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, I'd love to hear that as well. If you enjoy my free videos and would like to support the creation of more of them, as well as participate in behind the scenes content, digital downloads, and my monthly grumpy kitties, my monthly craft along kits, please consider joining me over on Patreon. That really helps keep the gears grinding away here at Back to Earth Creations. And I'm just really excited to keep learning new techniques and doing more projects with you guys. So until next time, happy crafting. Bye!